This is a lesson on factoring, and specifically choosing the correct method to use when you're factoring. So I've put together this factoring guide that you can follow along, and it says the first thing you should do is see if all of the terms have a greatest common factor that you can factor out. So you want to do that first, see if there's something that you can factor out of the polynomial. Then after that, you want to determine which method to use based upon the type of polynomial that you see. So here are the different types that I've covered with my classes. And so I won't speak through each of those, but if you want to go back to some of my other videos, I have lessons showing how to do each of these different types. And in the problems I'm going to do today, I will be using each of these methods. So basically you want to look at the type of polynomial you have, and then that's going to key you in on how you should factor it. And then the third step is to double check your answer and make sure that nothing else factors out. So at the end, always make sure that there's nothing else that can be done. And remember, you can always check your answer using FOIL. So I'm going to do several examples. If you want to skip around, you're welcome to do that. So here we go. So here's example number 1. I've left the little factoring guide up here in the upper right hand. You can follow along with that. So if I look at this, step 1 says, see if there's anything that can factor out of this. So if I look at this, I recognize that I can factor out a 7b. So that's what I'm going to do first, is divide both terms by 7b. So I'm going to divide out a 7b. That leaves me with 4a squared minus 9. And so now I'm going to look at this polynomial that's inside the parentheses here. And I notice that this is a difference of squares. So that follows this first one here that's in red. I've got a term minus another term, and both of these terms are perfect squares, so I can take the square root of them. So I'm going to bring the 7b along. A lot of times my students will forget the 7b, so don't forget that. The square root of 4a squared is 2a. The square root of 9 is 3. And then I just repeat that, but this one I make minus 3. I double check, nothing else can be factored here, so that's my final answer. So I first factored out a 7b, then I noticed that it fit the form of difference of squares, and I took the square root of each term. All right, so let's look at another example. So again, I'm first going to see if I can factor anything out, and I notice these have a common factor of 3. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to factor out a 3. Hold on one second. I'm going to change my pen to something that's a little bit thinner. So I'm going to factor out a 3. So I'm basically dividing each of these terms by 3. So it leaves me with m squared plus 9m minus 10. Okay, so now I look at what's in the parentheses here, and then I look over here to see which of these this fits. And that fits the one that's in purple here. So this is just a basic trinomial. So what we're looking for are two factors that multiply to make negative 10 and add to make 9. I just realized I made a mistake. Did you catch my mistake? I forgot to divide 3 out of the 9m. So let me fix that. See, everybody makes mistakes. Luckily, I caught it early and not at the end. So that should have been a 3m there. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to make negative 5 and add to make positive 3. So I'm thinking 5 and 2. One's got to be positive, one's got to be negative. I want the bigger number to be positive so that I get a positive 3. So don't forget this 3 out here. So I have m plus 5 times m minus 2. So 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Positive 5 plus negative 2 is positive 3. And that's your answer. All right, let's look at the next one. I think I have about 8 examples here, all using the different forms that you're going to see. All right, so this one has 4 terms, and there's nothing common that I can factor out here. So I'm using this method down here, one for 4 terms, and it says to use the grouping method. So the grouping method is where I split this in half. All right. The minus sign, remember, goes with the 4x, and then I factor each side of this. So on the left side, I can factor out an x squared. So factor out an x squared here. So this leaves me with x plus 2y. And then on the other side, I'm going to factor out a negative 4. So factor out a negative 4 times x plus 2y. So I'm dividing each of those by negative 4. That's why these became positive, because I factored out a negative 4. All right, everybody with me? So now I take this x squared minus 4 that I factored out, and I write it down. And then that's multiplied by the x plus 2y. So that's an example using grouping. All right, let's go to the next example. Remember, if you want, you're free to back up and look at an example again, right? So if you didn't follow something, just back up the video and watch me go through it again. All right. So example number 4 here. Is there anything I can factor out? The answer is no. So this is what is commonly called a slip and slide polynomial. So what we do with this is we multiply the a term times the c term. So I forgot to draw my arrow. We're looking at this, and the reason we know it's of this form is because there's a coefficient on the y squared. That's how I know that it's of this form. Whereas the one that's in purple here, there's not a coefficient on the first term. All right, so I'm going to multiply the 4 times the negative 2, and that's going to give me y squared plus 7y minus 8. So remember, really, I moved the 4 to the end, so that's why the 4 is not here anymore. And now I'm going to factor this, so I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to make negative 8 and add to make positive 7. So they have to be different signs to be negative when you multiply them. And the bigger number needs to be positive. So I'm thinking positive 8 and negative 1. So that gives me y plus 8 times y minus 1. And now the reason this is called slip and slide, because I'm slipping the 4 to the end here, and then I'm going to slide the 4 back down here, and I'm going to divide each of these by 4. So the 8 over 4 simplifies to just 2, so that becomes y plus 2. If it can't simplify, then you slip this 4 up next to the y there. So it becomes 4y minus 1. And that's your answer. And again, don't forget you can FOIL these to check them. So let's go ahead and do that on this one. I haven't checked any of them yet. So let's check this one. So if I multiply the first terms, I'd have y times 4y. That would be 4y squared. The outside or outer, negative 1 times y, so that's minus y. Rewrite that. So minus y. And then inner or inside, you have 2 times 4y, so that's plus 8y. And then last, 2 times negative 1 gives me negative 2. All right, so let's combine like terms here. You get 4y squared plus 7y minus 2, which is what we started with in the beginning, so we know we got the correct answer. So don't forget, you can always do that, especially if you have a test. You want to double check your answers, you got extra time, go back and FOIL them and check them. All right, let's look at example 5. So first thing we're going to do is see if we can factor anything out of this. And number-wise, we can factor out a 3. They all have a common factor of 3. And they all have at least one x and one y. So we're going to factor out a 3xy out of this. Let me go back to my thinner pen. I like this one. So 3xy is going to get factored out. And so that leaves me with 8xy minus 2y plus 1. All right, so now let's look at what's inside the parentheses and see if that fits anything over here. And it does not. It does not fit any of these forms that we have here. So the question mark here says, if it doesn't fit one of these forms, then you're done. So we're done. That's it. That's all you can do with that one is factor out the 3xy. Let's look at number 6 here. So look for a greatest common factor. Number-wise, I can factor out a 4. Variable-wise, I can factor out an x squared. So I'm going to factor out a 4x squared. So that leaves me with 2x squared minus x minus 6. All right, so let's look at this. What do we have here? Okay, this looks like this, right? Because there's a coefficient on there. So we're going to use slip and slide. So we're going to multiply 2 times negative 6. We're going to move the 2 over there. Again, don't forget about the 4x squared here. Don't lose track of that. So I move the 2, multiply the 2 times the negative 6. That gave me that. All right. So now I'm going to factor this. So now if you look at what we've got now, we've got one of these. What's in purple? Just a basic trinomial. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1. So anytime your product is negative, you know they have different signs. The bigger number needs to be negative, since this needs to be negative 1 here. So I'm thinking negative 4 and positive 3. Again, don't lose track of this 4x squared here. So I have x minus 4 times x plus 3. And then again, this is called slip and slide because, let me change colors here, because this 2 that I brought over here needs to come down here, and you need to divide these by 2. One mistake that I see sometimes for my students is they'll bring down the original 8 up here and divide these by 8. So be careful of that. You're bringing down this 2. So the 4 over 2 is going to simplify to 2. So it's going to leave me with, I almost forgot my 4x squared. Let's not forget that. So I have x minus 2. You can't simplify this, so I'm going to bring the 2 up next to the x. So it gives me 2x plus 3. It doesn't look like I can do anything else with that, so that's my answer. All right, so I got 2 more examples for you. Let's look at this one. All right, so any common factors? Number-wise, it looks like I can factor out a 6. And variable-wise, I can factor out an a. So I'm going to factor out a 6a. So that leaves me with 4b plus 5c. And I look to see if that fits any of the forms. A lot of times people will think, well, that's a difference of squares. No, because that's a plus sign. So it doesn't fit any of my forms over here. So that means that we're done. All right, and last example here. All right, so is there anything that I can factor out? And I would say no. So this one has 4 terms. Let me switch my color. I like the blue better than the red. So I'm going to switch my color to blue, which happens to match up with the color of the method we're going to use, slip and slide. Not slip and slide. Sorry about that. Okay. Here we go. 4 terms, right? It says 4 terms. So we're going to use grouping. So grouping, you're going to split it in half. So you have half the terms over here, half the terms over here. The minus sign goes with the x. And on this left side, what can I factor out of that? Looks like I can factor out a 9x squared. So I'm going to factor out 9x squared. So that leaves me with x plus y. And then on the other side, I can factor out a -1. Again, that's going to take these minus signs and change them into plus signs. So that leaves me with x plus y. So rewrite this as 9x squared minus 1 times x plus y. Okay. Now this is the only example that I showed you that involves this third step here. So do you see what else we can do to this? Change colors. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is a difference of squares problem. So we're actually going to factor this first binomial again using difference of squares. So the square root of 9x squared is 3x. The square root of 1 is 1. All right, 3x plus 1 times 3x minus 1. That's how you do difference of squares. And then I still have that x plus y. And now I'm done. So that's about as tricky as one as you're going to see. All right, so I hope this video helped you out. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Until next time.